Welcome to the channel where history meets mind-blowing facts. Here your knowledge will get a powerful boost with every video. From hidden events to legendary figures, we cover it all. He was born into greatness. The son of an emperor hailed as the last of the 5 good emperors. A boy whose destiny was carved not by battle or brilliance, but by blood. Commodus entered the world not as a warrior or a politician, but as a prince of the most powerful empire on earth, Rome. His father, Marcus Aurelius, was the philosopher king, a ruler who wrote meditations on virtue while defending the empire from its enemies. To many, Marcus was the embodiment of wisdom and discipline, a beacon of stability in an increasingly unstable world. And when he named Commodus his heir, the Roman world held its breath. It was the first time in nearly a century that a Roman emperor chose his own son to succeed him. The previous emperors had all been selected based on merit and skill, not family ties. But Marcus broke the tradition. He believed that with the right guidance, Commodus could become more than just an heir. He could become a worthy successor. Tutors, generals, philosophers, all were summoned to shape the young prince into a ruler. Commodus was given everything a future emperor could need: education, training, power, and proximity to Rome's elite. At age 5, he was named Caesar. At 15, he was made co-emperor. And at 18, he became the sole ruler of an empire that stretched from the windswept highlands of Britannia to the deserts of Egypt. But behind the marble walls of the imperial palace, cracks were already beginning to show. Commodus was different from his father. Where Marcus Aurelius sought wisdom and quiet reflection, Commodus longed for luxury and spectacle. While Marcus led armies and endured brutal winters on the frontiers, Commodus enjoyed the comforts of Rome, indulging in its pleasures and avoiding its responsibilities. He never cared for the grind of statecraft, nor the burden of leading legions. The Senate, the generals, even his own advisors began to whisper doubts. Could this boy, raised in silk and shielded from suffering, really wear the same laurel crown as his father? Still, the empire remained hopeful. Marcus Aurelius had left a legacy too powerful to ignore. Perhaps Commodus simply needed time to grow, to step into the role fate had laid out for him. After all, he had been raised in the very heart of Roman civilization. He had seen firsthand how an emperor should act. He had watched his father deal with famine, war, and political unrest with calm precision. Surely, that example would live on in him. But the transition of power would test more than just Commodus. It would test Rome itself. The empire had grown too large, too complex, and too fragile. Enemies lurked at every border. Rebellions simmered in the provinces. Corruption crept through the Senate and the streets alike. Marcus had held it all together through sheer force of will and intellect. When he died, that glue began to dissolve. And at the center of it all stood a young man not yet ready, perhaps not even willing to lead. The moment Commodus took the throne alone, something changed. Rome did not see a continuation of Marcus Aurelius. It saw a rupture. The military sensed weakness. The Senate grew uneasy. The people of Rome, once dazzled by the pageantry of the imperial family, began to sense something darker behind the prince's golden smile. Commodus didn't seek to command respect, he demanded it. Not through valor or vision, but through fear and showmanship. Where his father sought to protect Rome's traditions, Commodus wanted to remake them in his own image. He viewed the empire not as a sacred trust but as a personal inheritance. Rome to him was not a republic in decline, nor a machine of state. It was a playground, a stage, and he was its star. He surrounded himself with flatterers and favorites, men and women who told him what he wanted to hear, not what he needed to know. Those who questioned him disappeared. Those who opposed him died, and those who remained played along, hoping to survive the whirlwind that was beginning to form around the young emperor. Commodus had no interest in being a philosopher like his father. He had no desire to write meditations or lead campaigns in the cold north. He found greater joy in the roar of the crowd at the Colosseum, in the lavish feasts of the imperial palace, in the reflection of his own image carved into statues across the empire. He believed himself to be chosen, not just by birth but by the gods themselves. He would call himself Hercules reborn. He would dress in lion skins and carry a wooden club, not as a joke, but as a symbol of divine power. And the people? They didn't know whether to laugh or to bow. Even those closest to him began to feel unease. His sister Lucilla, once a powerful ally, began to plot against him. Senators who had once celebrated his rise now watched from the shadows, uncertain of how long his reign would last. The empire, that great machine built by centuries of conquest and governance, was being bent to serve the whims of a single man. At first, the people of Rome tried to believe. They told themselves that Commodus was simply young, that time would mold him into a proper emperor. But time did not make him wiser, it made him stranger. From the moment he took sole control of the empire, something shifted. The confidence that might have inspired greatness quickly warped into something more dangerous. He began to see enemies in every shadow, betrayal in every whisper, and disloyalty in every glance. The man who once had the world in his hands was now consumed by one driving emotion: fear. The Senate, once a respected body of seasoned minds, became a hall of silence. Few dared to speak freely. Commodus viewed their experience not as an asset but as a threat. Anyone who advised him, corrected him, or simply failed to flatter him enough quickly found themselves stripped of their rank, imprisoned, or worse, executed. The empire had seen ruthless rulers before, but this was something new. Commodus wasn't strategic in his cruelty. He was chaotic, impulsive, and terrifyingly unpredictable. No one knew what might provoke his wrath. A rumor, a dream, a passing joke could be enough to send a senator or general to their death. He didn't rule through law or diplomacy. He ruled through paranoia. One by one, the competent advisors Marcus Aurelius had trusted were removed, replaced by flatterers, sycophants, and opportunists, men who had no loyalty to Rome, only to their own survival. They whispered lies to Commodus, fed his insecurities, and encouraged his worst impulses. They told him he was invincible, divine, beyond judgment, and he believed them. He became obsessed with conspiracies, convinced that everyone, his generals, his allies, even his own family, was plotting against him. In truth, many weren't. At least, not at first. But Commodus's erratic behavior began to create the very traitors he feared. Even his sister Lucilla, once close to him, began to see the monster growing behind her brother's golden eyes. She had ambitions of her own, yes, but she also feared what he would do to the empire, and to her. She joined a conspiracy to have him assassinated, but like many such plots in Rome, it failed. Commodus, now faced with real proof of betrayal, lashed out. The executions were brutal. Friends, guards, nobles, all swept away in a tide of blood. Rome became a city of whispers. No one could be trusted. Walls had ears. Slaves became spies. The air in the capital thickened with dread. While Commodus fed his fears, the empire around him began to decay. Corruption spread like wildfire. Local governors and officials, no longer afraid of being held accountable, began to enrich themselves. Bribes became more important than laws. Justice was something only the rich could afford. The military, once the backbone of Roman power, was neglected or manipulated. Competent generals were replaced by favorites. Border legions went unpaid. Morale dropped. Discipline collapsed. And in the provinces, rebellion stirred. But Commodus was too busy watching his own back to see the cracks in the foundation. He built walls around his palace, around his mind. He isolated himself, surrounded only by those who played along with his growing delusions. The idea of being a ruler gave way to the fantasy of being a god. The roar of the crowd echoed through the marble walls of the Colosseum, rising like thunder as the gates to the arena creaked open. Dust swirled in the golden sunlight, and all eyes turned toward the figure stepping into the sand. Not a weathered gladiator, not a captured barbarian, but the emperor himself. Commodus, dressed not in the robes of a ruler but in the lion skin of Hercules, walked into the arena with a wooden club in his hand and a grin stretched across his face. The people cheered, some out of awe, others out of fear, all trapped in the strange and terrifying theater that Rome had become. Commodus didn't want to be remembered as a philosopher or a statesman. He wanted to be immortalized as a god. Not just a god in statues or prayers, but a living, breathing deity walking among mortals. He had declared himself the reincarnation of Hercules, and to prove it, he fought in the arena not once or twice, but hundreds of times. The emperor who ruled the greatest empire on earth wanted to be a performer, a spectacle, the star of Rome's bloodiest stage. He saw the arena not as a place of punishment or sport, but as a stage for his myth. And the audience, whether they adored him or trembled before him, had no choice but to watch. But these weren't real battles, not for him. Commodus chose his opponents carefully. Old, injured, or unarmed men were brought in to face him. Condemned. Prisoners, crippled soldiers, even animals that had been drugged or chained. With every staged victory, he would raise his arms to the sky, pretending to earn his glory while knowing the danger was an illusion. And yet he demanded the crowd respond with genuine awe. He wanted the Senate, the nobles, the slaves, everyone, to believe, or at least pretend to believe, that he was the greatest warrior Rome had ever known. He didn't fight for justice or entertainment. He fought for praise, for worship. Every drop of blood in the sand was a tribute to his vanity. And if someone failed to clap loud enough, if a senator didn't cheer enthusiastically, their silence could be seen as treason. He kept a watchful eye on who applauded and who didn't. In Commodus's Rome, even watching could be dangerous. One wrong look, one furrowed brow, and your name could be added to the growing list of those who mysteriously vanished after the games. The Colosseum became the center of Roman life not as a cultural symbol but as a warning. Commodus poured enormous amounts of gold into the games, gold the empire couldn't afford to waste. Gladiators were ordered to lose on cue. Artists carved statues of Commodus in heroic poses, wrestling lions, standing over slain beasts. Poets wrote hymns to his greatness. He even renamed months of the calendar after himself and the gods he claimed as equals. Rome wasn't just ruled by Commodus anymore, it was Commodus. The empire was being reshaped into his fantasy. Across the provinces, cities were forced to erect monuments in his honor. Coins were minted with his face wearing a lion's mane. Public buildings were inscribed with titles like Conqueror of the Gladiators, the New Hercules, and the Invincible. These weren't honors earned through victory in war or reform in law. They were self-appointed, driven by his obsession with myth and ego. He didn't want to be remembered as an emperor. He wanted to be remembered as a legend. But beneath the applause, something was breaking. The people of Rome were growing tired. The Senate was humiliated. The military was neglected. The empire's borders were no longer secure. While Commodus played at war in the arena, real battles were being lost on the frontiers. Generals pleaded for resources. Provinces begged for help. But the emperor was too busy practicing his next performance, too caught up in the illusion of his invincibility to notice the empire unraveling around him. Inside the palace, fear had reached a boiling point. His advisors, even the most loyal, began to whisper in secret. The gladiator games were not just entertainment, they were madness laid bare. A ruler obsessed with showmanship and worship had replaced duty with delusion. And with each staged victory in the Colosseum, his grip on reality slipped further. Some began to question whether Commodus truly believed he was divine. Others feared he did. Either way, the consequences were the same. Rome had become a kingdom of fear, ruled by a man who would rather kill a slave in the sand than meet with his generals or govern his provinces. Yet he remained untouchable. Every attempt to challenge him ended in blood. Every conspiracy was sniffed out, tortured out, or crushed beneath his heel. But the louder the cheers in the arena became, the more desperate they sounded. Rome was clapping not out of love, but out of survival. And in that great amphitheater, as lions roared and swords clashed, the empire held its breath as whispers turned into plans and plans turned into daggers. Commodus, the man who fancied himself a living god, had grown too wild, too erratic, too dangerous. He had alienated the Senate, mocked tradition, drained the treasury, and filled the city with fear. The Colosseum, once a place of public entertainment, had become a shrine to his madness. The nobility watched from their seats as their emperor dressed as Hercules and slaughtered drugged animals or staged fights against helpless men. It was no longer merely humiliating, it was terrifying. Rome, once ruled by emperors of wisdom and restraint, now bowed to a man who thought the gods spoke through him. By this time, no one in the imperial court felt safe. Friends vanished overnight. Officials who had served for decades were replaced by teenage favorites and palace jesters. Even his inner circle had begun to turn against him. The final unraveling came when Commodus announced his most outrageous idea yet. He planned to abandon traditional titles and instead be known as the Roman god of gladiators. More than that, he intended to dress as a gladiator during official ceremonies, and even declared that he would start the new year not with reforms or blessings, but with his appearance in the Colosseum as a combatant. Rome would not be ruled from the Senate or the palace. It would be ruled from the arena. That was the moment the people closest to him decided they had no choice. If they didn't act, Rome would fall with him. The conspirators included powerful senators, advisors, and even his own mistress, Marcia. She had once been one of the few people Commodus trusted, but even she had come to see the chaos he had created. When she discovered her name on a secret list of those marked for execution, she knew what needed to be done. There would be no trial, no exile, no public revolt. The emperor would have to die in the shadows. On December 31st, 192 AD, as the empire prepared to enter a new year under the shadow of Commodus's madness, the final act was set in motion. Marcia, under the pretense of affection, offered Commodus a cup of poisoned wine. But fate, as always, had its own sense of irony. Commodus vomited the poison, surviving the initial attempt. There was no time to try again. The conspirators panicked. Waiting until morning would be too late. Commodus would discover the plot and they would all face a slow and brutal death. So they turned to a man named Narcissus, a professional wrestler and Commodus's own sparring partner. Narcissus was summoned under the cover of night, brought to the emperor's private bath chamber. Commodus, groggy and weakened, was still recovering from the poison. Before he could resist, Narcissus attacked. The struggle was brief. The emperor, once so obsessed with proving his strength in the arena, was strangled to death in silence by the very man he trained with. No crowds, no cheers, no divine intervention. The self-proclaimed god died not in glory, but in the steam and shadows of his private chamber, undone not by a barbarian horde or a rival general, but by his own delusions. The news of his death swept through Rome like wildfire. The city did not mourn. The Senate declared his memory cursed. Statues were torn down. His name was stripped from every building and monument. Coins were melted, months renamed, honors erased. Rome tried to bury every trace of Commodus, as if wiping his name from history could erase the madness he brought. But the scars he left behind could not be so easily hidden. His death plunged the empire into civil war. 4 emperors would rise and fall in the following year alone, each claiming legitimacy, each fighting to restore order. The foundations of Rome had been shaken. And though the empire would survive for centuries more, something fundamental had been lost. Commodus was not just another tyrant. He was the beginning of a slow, irreversible decline. He turned the imperial throne into a stage, replaced duty with delusion, and nearly dragged the Roman Empire into the abyss with him. He ruled not with vision or strength, but with fear and fantasy. And in the end, all that remained of his reign were blood-stained sands, broken statues, and a warning that even the greatest empires can fall when power is given to the wrong hands. If you found this story fascinating and want to explore more hidden tales of history's most dangerous rulers, forgotten empires, and legendary events, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Your support helps bring history back to life, one story at a time.